Welcome to the Squared Circle Pit with your host, Rob Pasbani.
Now entering the Squared Circle Pit, she is the Queen of the Ring. You may have seen her on Twitch. Love your streams. We have Alex with me. Thank you, Alex, for joining me on the special edition of Squared Circle Pit.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I'm ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, I love your studio. It looks awesome. I love all the little tchotchkes in the background distracting me.
Hey, yeah, there's so much there.
Yeah, especially
like a
that
whole bunch of.
What's that flag of the Wrestling Queen? It says.
Oh yeah, this is a Wrestling Queendom, which was the AJW event. Yeah, and it has like the whole roster with Aja, Kira Hokuto, Bull in the back there.
Awesome.
So,
yeah, I love how much you celebrate women's wrestling, because for me it is a bit of a blind spot, and so it's always fun to follow your pages and learn more about it. And I'm curious, how long have you been watching pro wrestling?
All of my life.
Amazing.
All of my life. I have two older brothers, so I was getting like pile drivers in the 90s, like when I was growing up, because I was the youngest.
Do you remember like your earliest wrestling memory, or like the first angle that you remember getting into?
Yeah. My earliest wrestling memory is WrestleMania 12 with Shawn Michaels versus Bret Hart Iron Man match, and he just ziplined down to my heart. And I was sold ever since.
I was such a Heartbreak Kid myself as a teenager. I loved him so much because he was like the first WWE guy to kind of like have work rate. I didn't know that was it at the time, but I was just like, oh, he's so exciting, he's so flashy, and it was very fun. Yeah, I was totally a Shawn Michaels guy, not a Bret Hart guy.
Yeah, I think like later in life, I've appreciated Bret Hart more. You know, like in terms of like his technicality, like actually understanding it in the like in ring psychology and whatnot, and learning about the different stories of Bret, like the one from SummerSlam where he was like carrying British the Bulldog, and then watching that match is like, dude, holy shit, like you did such a good job doing that, you know? So, but yeah, when I was younger, it was all Shawn, and like the whole getup I was like super into with the hat and glasses and the like the little dangly earring, little TikTok dangly earring now.
Yeah, I love, that's the other thing too. Like his outfits were always so cool with the zebra print, and then like he would come out the next day with like the inverse of the zebra print where the hearts were zebra, and I was all about it. Like, I don't know if you've seen, there's some wiki that tracks every Shawn Michaels outfit he's ever worn, and with like screenshots and everything.
Yep, I do.
Love
I do.
All about it.
I have a video on my channel, and I rank like my favorite top 5 Shawn Michaels gear, and I went back to that site to like look up like, okay, what's the exact date on this? What was the exact event on this? So shout out to whoever that is who like kept track with that after all these years.
And so as you started with 12, there really wasn't that much women's wrestling presence. There was Alundra Blaze and the icon Luna Vachon, who I'm sure we'll be talking about briefly. But like, who were like the first women wrestlers that you connected with, or like, do you remember watching like a women's match and just being like, oh, hey, like having it all click for you, like, oh, this is what I want?
It was later on in life with like Lita and Trish and Molly Holly, where I actually like watched matches involving like 2 women. But growing up, it was always Luna Vachon, especially like Luna teaming up with Bam Bam Bigelow. That's my favorite like
couple goals
duo. Yeah. Ultimate couple goals. And then throwing it back to Shawn Michaels when she came out at WrestleMania 9 with Shawn, and it was like all the leather and the chains with Shawn too. So I was like obsessed, and like the veins coming through. Like I was super into the pageantry of wrestling, and I still am. And so when it came to the guys, like all the technical stuff, you know, like the high flying is impressive and it's cool, but what draws me in the most is the pageantry and like the acting of it. And so when I saw Luna, I was like, first of all, that's not her voice, but I know she is terrifying with that voice that she does. And so she really drew me in. But like, well, the thing was like the hook, line, and sinker when it came to women in professional wrestling was Chyna.
Yes.
It was so undeniable. It was
Yeah.
so undeniable. And especially like seeing her go toe to toe with like people like Jeff Jarrett and Chris Jericho was like, oh snap, like this is so cool.
Yeah, and even that's the like setup to that Royal Rumble. I think it was 99 where they had the mini Royal Rumble to determine who would be number 30. And Vince McMahon thought he was winning, and then the music hits and it's Chyna and she beats him up, and the Stooges. I remember as a kid I was losing it. I was totally team Chyna. I was ready for her to be world champion. And like I felt like in my group of friends, I was like the only one that defended Chyna. Like I was like, no, she's the best. Like she rules and she's pretty. Like I don't care what you guys say. She has her own beauty. Like shut up and she'll kick your ass. Like I was so into her. I was always into the women's wrestlers as well. I think because similarly I had a younger sister and I would always try to get her into it. She never really got into it, but we would play the Raw video game on Genesis and she would always be Luna. Like that was just who she picked. So like I would always try to like oh look, Luna's on screen, come let's watch.
Yeah.
But yeah, Luna, like this episode is about the most metal wrestlers of all time, and we're not going to do rankings. We're just going to celebrate the metal women. And Luna is definitely like a very early entry, and I loved her. Let's talk about her a little more. The thunderbolts and the voice, like she was scary but in a fun way, like Elvira. I guess Elvira's more campy. She wasn't going for campy. She was just going for fear. And I loved that they paired her with Bam Bam, who I already was a fan of because he had the coolest look and the fire. And what I loved about her was it was the first woman I recall that wasn't like dainty and like, oh no, don't, like she was ready to step up.
Yeah, like she was like climbing on top of people's backs. Like there's the one, isn't it WrestleMania 10 where she's on Bam Bam's back and he like does the slam from like the turnbuckle or something. Like she was never afraid to go like toe to toe with like half of these men that were like 10 times her size, because I think like she was so tiny, but yeah, like when she was teamed up with Bam Bam, like it was again like Bam Bam with the flames and like the head tattoos and like the sleeves and everything. Like, so for her to team up with him was like, okay, this is super like rock and roll, And even with her voice, like, could you imagine like if she was the lead singer of a metal band with that voice?
It would be great.
She did. Yeah.
She could easily front any death metal band out there right now.
Dude, seriously.
It was very tragic watching her dark side of the ring. With how much she wanted to be the women's champion at the time when the women's championship didn't really mean much. It was just kind of like a prop for Alundra Blaze. And like there was that one story that Alundra Blaze told Medusa where she was just like, they were at a house show and she was like, just beat me, pin me. Like, I want you to pin me. Like, I want you to win the belt. And Luna was such a pro and such a student of the game. She couldn't possibly bring herself to like break the code of like what the match was written out for. Like that was so touching to me. Like I felt so bad for her seeing like just give her the belt.
Yeah and she had so much passion for the business as well, and like her authenticity is what shined the most. And she was one of the first women possibly in like a major platform of WWE that like stood out against everyone else, because at the time it was like Sunny and Sable and Alundra Blaze, like these blonde bombshells, and she's also a blonde bombshell but in a totally different realm. And so yeah, whenever she just came on screen, I was just like instantly glued on her because she was so different compared to anything else that I was seeing at the time. I wish I had access to like Japanese women's wrestling because I would have blew my mind even more when I was a kid. But Luna for me was like the closest to that like hardcore style that I saw later in life with like so many different women now today in like 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. And even it was cool too, because they had so few women on the roster and they needed Alundra to have feuds. They brought in, for example, Bull Nakano, who is another very metal wrestler. We will definitely get to her. And Luna managed her, I remember, because they just needed someone to speak English. And I thought that was such a cool pair. Like, there's someone even scarier than Luna, I loved Bull Nakano. Let's talk about Bull Nakano now. My first introduction to her was in WWF when she came in to feud with Alundra Blaze Medusa, and I loved the look. I love that she was not trying to be a pinup or whatever. She's just a tough girl. And that leg drop off the top rope is one of the most devastating moves. I can't even, like, I do jujitsu and we're on our knees and I leave with my tailbone hurting. I can't imagine doing a leg drop from like 10 feet in the air every night and how your tailbone must feel.
Well, have you seen the steel cage match that she was in AJW against Aja Kong, where she does that big leg drop from the top of the cage? Like,
it's nuts.
I can't believe it.
Yeah, the way she bounced, it's like she bounces off the ring when she falls. It's like, the pain.
Yeah, and I think it's like that ring was so much more stiff than the ring in WWE too. So that's like even more intensified.
Yeah.
Just out of this world. So wild. And I think in that match, or maybe it was another match, I'm not sure if it was her or Aja Kong, brought up, they had like this chain, and at the end of this chain was like this blade hook or something. That's like the most metal weapon you could ever bring to a wrestling match. And then she always wore like band t-shirts too. Like she's worn like Megadeth shirts, maybe Slayer shirts. Actually, recently, Bull Nakano was in Skabon, which is the Joshi promotion that happened in September, and she came out to Angel of Death by Slayer. So it's like,
I love it.
You can't get more badass than that.
Yeah, in my head, like when I see Bull Nakano, I see her in a Megadeth shirt, like a cut up Megadeth shirt. So yeah, that's so cool. And she was so awesome. And I feel like if WWE at the time presented it as tough and authentic, I think it would have gotten over. I remember the first women's match I ever saw where it wasn't like a joke. It was like a Ring of Honor match where they had like Shimmer women come in, and this was very early in Ring of Honor, like 2004. And I remember I saw specifically Mercedes Martinez, and I was just like, wow, this is a great, like, this isn't just a great women. And I'm sorry if I'm showing my my bias, but I'm like, this isn't just a great women's wrestler. Like, she's awesome. Like, it was the first time that in my naive head I was like, oh, like, why can't women have like these, competitive matches just as good as the men, where it's not like they weren't presented as divas. They weren't presented as like sex. They were presented as athletes. And like, I was like, yeah, I want this. This is what I want. Like, when did you have that moment?
Oh man, that's tough, because I think in WWE, as a woman growing up with WWE, it was hard not to watch, like, it was all every week, like bra and panties matches, which is, they had to do what they had to do, and they did a good job, but also like the degrading stuff, misogyny, blah, 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 all that stuff, which is,
and it wasn't entertaining
very much.
It's like,
it really wasn't.
It wasn't good.
And that was the thing, like, going back to when you mentioned getting your sister to play video games with you, like, my brother had Day of Reckoning 2 on GameCube. Trish Stratus was on that game, and I played it, and it was like there was also a bra and panties option in the game where you like play bra and panties matches. And I'm in my room like playing this, and I'm like, I don't know if this is okay.
Yeah.
But then I liked it, but then I grew up and I became bisexual, and I was like, okay, I think that answered some questions. But even then, like, it was hard to really depict when I saw it as taking it a little bit more serious. I think maybe it was Bayley versus Sasha at TakeOver in NXT. Before that, I did see a lot of Mayu Iwatani in Ring of Honor. So that like changed the game for me a little bit, just seeing her like being so great in the ring and like high flying, and like she was landing on her neck most of the time, and she's walking out the ring winning. It's like, that's insane. But yeah, I think I would say like Bayley versus Sasha was the one where I was like, okay, like, women can do this. And it's more so like women can do it, because there was a lot of great matches with Beth and Molly Holly and Jacqueline and Jazz even too. But I think with that TakeOver match, it was more so of a display of everybody else is taking this serious, you know, where it was like the whole entire crowd for that event was super behind it. The pop at the end when Bailey wins, like it got me emotional because it's like usually I would enjoy this and I would pop massively for it. So to see a room full of people, so many different people, not just women, popping for it was like, oh, okay, so we're definitely taking this a little more serious now. During lockdown, back in 2020 was when I first discovered like the full AJW experience because like you, I experienced Bull Nakano through WWE and Aja Kong. And so then to watch them and see them presented under the same light as what I used to watch in like Noah or like back early New Japan days, it's like, oh, okay, this is cool. Like they're presenting them, you know, having this parade whenever they start the event, having them out into the ring and like, you know, announcing them, and the entrances, even like they weren't cut short, they didn't get a jobber entrance or anything. Like it was like brand new, and that really like stuck out with me a lot. And I was like, okay, like I did have a platform where women's wrestling was a little bit more serious and not just like hokey, but then to get the full experience and know that it was happening on the other side of the world a little before I was born is like kind of changed the game for me a little bit.
Yeah, and I think with Japan, what's so great about it, like you said, you love the pageantry, which I'm with you. I always, like, I never had pay-per-view as a kid, and my friend would tape them for me, and I would always be like, what was the set like? And he'd be like, what? I don't care. The matches were great. But in Japan, what I love is they loved the pageantry is so important, like with the flowers and the robes and everything. And on top of that, the wrestling is much more intense too. So it's like the best of both worlds. Like you said, like even with Aja Kong, I was very late to the game with her myself, other than what I saw in WCW and WWF at the time. But it's so cool to watch her matches and watch how much respect that she has, that she even wrestled men there, and the men would sell for her like she's a beast, like she's Bam Bam Bigelow, you know? So that was so cool to see. And going back and watching those matches, like it's interesting to me that you said that it was that NXT match that opened your eye, like, you know, we're like, all right, I'm diving into this, because also another thing that restricted, I think, women's wrestling from getting bigger was there wasn't streaming. Like streaming was difficult. Like Ring of Honor in the early aughts, you can only buy DVDs. Like internet access wasn't as fast, so you can't really download the whole DVD. So it was hard to seek the stuff out, other than if you're like a hardcore tape trader. But by the time of the Brooklyn NXT, there's the WWE Network. You know, there's streaming, there's torrent sites, there's YouTube, like everything was uploaded to YouTube, all the tape traders uploading to YouTube. So it was much easier to really discover all these new matches. And that's funny because like around that time, that's when I started really getting into Japanese wrestling as well, through New Japan World, and then like watching a few of the G1 tournaments. And it's just like, there was such a while where WWE was the only game in town that you forget that there's other ways, or I forgot that there's other ways to present wrestling. And it was so exciting discovering all these different styles, and women's wrestling being one of them for sure.
Yeah, like before that takeover match, I was exposed to like New Japan. Like I was so huge on Kenny Omega's era of being leader of a Bullet Club, right? And even discovering that was like, whoa, what's going on here? Like this is something I don't really know too much about. And especially, you know, I grew up on wrestling. I grew up on WWE and WCW and ECW. And like I didn't really know anything else until I got a little older. And I was like maybe a senior in high school. And I heard about Ring of Honor, and sometimes I would watch some Ring of Honor matches. And then through that is when I got into New Japan. And when I got into New Japan, it was like, okay, the pageantry in New Japan was like so much bigger than it is in the States, you know, like when Jushin Thunder Liger would come out, like that was like so grand with his cape and his mask and everything, like his presence. And so like you said, it was hard to step out of the game of like WWE and realize that there was more in wrestling than, you know, this cookie cutter sports entertainment format. And so then when the takeover match happened and it was like, okay, what else is happening with women? And then to discover like Shine and Shimmer and Stardom at that time when it was first starting out, and then TJPW later on in life too, was like, it was so refreshing. And it was like to see that representation of badass women in professional wrestling. And again, like to know that they were doing this back in the 90s. And like, if there was a streaming site, I would eat that up. I probably would become a wrestler if I had a streaming site.
Yeah, you would exactly. I actually just watched, we were doing like a 1995 WCW watch through, and there was a World War III 95 had a women's tag match with, it was like Bull Nakano and Akira Hokuto against, I forget who, but it was the best match on the card. I was like, and it was like strong style. Like they put, and this is a card with like Hulk Hogan, Sting, you know, like the big 90 stars, and all of that was crap. And I was just losing. Like this match, if you go watch it today, it's World War III 95. It still holds up. And in fact, the next night on Nitro, they had another match, same women, and it was just as awesome. And like, so this was here. And and the other thing I wanted to mention about this match, what really blew my mind is I was paying attention to the crowd. And at first the crowd doesn't know these women. These women got no build up, no promo. You know, like Sonny Ono is the only person at ringside that anybody knows. So the crowd is dead. But then, you know, 5-10 minutes in, these women are working their asses off, and a WCW crowd, they will pop for work rate. And by the end of the match, for the finish, the crowd was on their feet and they were like, you know, counting along 1, 2, yeah, you know, and it was just like, it was presented authentically. It wasn't presented as, you know, these vixens or whatever. It was just like women fighting. Let's do it. And people ate it up. So I wonder if Vince didn't have that mindset of like, oh, it can only be hot women, and actually tried to present some women as authentic athletes the way they are now, would it have worked back then? I think yes.
I think yes too. I do think yes as well. And I will give WCW that credit where whenever they presented the Joshi women, or even just women in general, like they would try to steer away from like this hot bombshell, like,
yeah,
you know, tits and ass and everything like that, which is great. But like they steered away from that a little bit. I think it would have worked because, like you said, WCW, like the crowd didn't really like pop for them, didn't really know what was going on. But then towards the end of the match, like they're like, holy shit, like these women are really badass. But if you think about it, like if the internet was a thing back then, right, you would instantly Google them and you would instantly be like, okay, I want to watch more of them, which is what people do nowadays. And I think if you added those elements, and then Vince probably would have changed his mind and, you know, would have taken it a little bit more serious, like WWE is now today. I mean, women are main eventing WrestleMania, right?
Yeah.
Like they've already had the first Hell in a Cell and ladder matches and everything. So I think it definitely would have worked out, but who knows? Go on a time machine and give them the idea.
Well, we mentioned her before, but let's talk about Chyna for a few minutes. Like I said, I was all about Chyna. I like the moment she debuted when she grabbed Marlena, who was like 4'10",
Yeah.
and Chyna's like 6 foot, and she just threw her around like a rag doll. I was like, who is this? Like, what? Yeah. Like, this is amazing. Like, this is such a, and to Vince McMahon's credit, he absolutely knew what he had with her. Like they bestowed upon her what I think is probably the most like complimentary moniker, which is calling her the ninth wonder of the world. Now, of course, there's only 7 wonders of the world. And then Andre the Giant was famously known as the 8th wonder of the world. And so to put her in that echelon of like, this is like a modern Andre the Giant, and it's a woman who could beat you up. Like, she was a main eventer. She was the first woman main eventer in WWE. How do you feel about Chyna?
Yeah. I love Chyna. And even her debut was so captivating. Because again, at that time, like to see somebody in the crowd choking out like talent was like, wait, what's going on? Like, is this real?
Yeah.
Are they part of the show? You know, and then it turned out that she was a part of the show. And I do think that they banked on her so quick. And especially when she came through, like, again, there was Marlena, there was Sunny, there was Luna, you know, like they had a whole bunch of other women on that roster. But I will give them credit where it's like they saw Chyna and they like rode her to the bank, rightfully so. And her work ethic like definitely did show. And I think her teaming up with Shawn and Hunter, I'm sure she learned so much from them on the road. And I always think back to that one steel cage match where it was like the blue cage, remember? And it was Triple H versus Mankind, and Chyna was super involved in that. And like even early on, I would watch that match because I loved Mankind. I was terrified of him, but I loved him. And then to watch her go toe to toe with him, it was like, well, if she's not scared of him, she's badass as hell, you know? But yeah, they really like banked on her because it's like there wouldn't have been another woman that they would do that with. And then for her to come in, and it definitely helped that she was a bodybuilder, and to see her be almost bigger than some of the other guys, like almost bigger than like Taka Michinoku, for example, you know, like to see her get into the ring or even just help out ringside. Like Luna was doing the same thing, but Chyna was just on another level. And she was the first woman to enter a Royal Rumble. She was the first woman, I believe, to main event a Monday Night Raw, which was that one, the, you know, mini battle royal where she had to enter through that. Was a huge hit, and she's the only woman to hold the Intercontinental Championship. So they put all their eggs in one basket when it came to her. And even later on, when she was by herself, like WrestleMania 17, where she comes out with a big bazooka and like the purple outfit, and like she just like gorilla presses Ivory, lets her go, and then 1, 2, 3. Her. Boom. Yeah, just absolutely destroys her. But it's not only just the women that she was destroying. Like she was doing the same with the men, you know?
Yeah.
And even teaming up with Eddie Guerrero later on. And then like, you know, she'd have like the roses, but then there was like a steel pipe, like a lead pipe in the roses, and she'd always help out Eddie Guerrero. Like
I think that's what got him over too. Like that like he wasn't over before Latino Heat, and just his interactions with her and the way she kind of sold for his flirting is what endeared him to the community, I think. And with Chyna also, it was very interesting. Initially, they kept her away from the women. She would only be in the program with men, and I'm sure for all the men back then, they didn't want to sell for her. They were like, who's this woman? But because she had Triple H and Shawn Michaels backing her, they had her back. Like, I feel like if she was out there with anyone else, she would have never become the star that she did, because she needed that political advocate backstage to be like, no, you're doing this. Like Vince is saying, you have to do this. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, who would you think would go be in a Monday Night Raw segment with people like Stone Cold Steve Austin, where she wasn't the eye candy, right? Like she wasn't like Deborah, so to say. Like she was a valet, but she could still put hands on you. And for her to later on in her career to be in that position where now she could put other like younger talent over on the roster like that, like I agree. I think that Eddie definitely gained some popularity through Chyna, and even then Chyna was everywhere. Was everywhere. She was
all over pop culture, all over MTV. And it is very tragic what ended up happening, and I feel so bad. And I just think about, like, if she was around, can you imagine, like, right now, like, what an icon, like what a hero she would be treated exactly how she wanted to be treated right before she died. That's like the true tragedy of everything, is that like finally, like now women's wrestling is at a point where she would have gotten the respect that she deserved. And I feel like she would have like made killings at these conventions, or, you know, coming out and getting a pop in AEW to low blow Jeff Jarrett or whatever. Like she could have totally had like a second career. But obviously at the time, WWE was the only game in town. that bridge was burned. We don't have to get into the the weird stuff that happened there, but it's very sad because she truly was like an icon and such an inspiration. And like, I don't think the Rhea Ripley character today would be what it is if it wasn't for Chyna. Not to say that Rhea's ripping her off, but it's very clearly like a deviation or an inspiring of what the Chyna character was.
Yeah, Chyna opened her doors for Rhea. Not just Rhea, but like just like so many different people, but definitely Rhea. You can see through the lens of WWE, she like kicked down that door for her. Chyna did. And yeah, when you think back to the Royal Rumble, the first Women's Royal Rumble in 2018, if she was a part of that,
oh my God, yeah, that would have been amazing.
I get goosebumps. Yeah,
like just seeing Alundra Blaze come out for that, I was so like, oh my God, she's like, they invited her back. Like, I always felt so bad for her because of the whole WCW thing with the women's title. Like, it's like, that wasn't her. That was Eric Bischoff making her do that. Leave her alone. Like, I think Medusa belongs on this list as well because like Medusa was the only one holding it down in the 90s. And like I feel like she was the only one like kind of fighting for women's wrestling at the time to make Vince give her programs and like do something with me before he just was like, whatever, just leave. But even then she went to WCW, and I feel like she really got things going there when she jumped in like 95 because she would bring in all these great Japanese women to feud with, and that's the first time I learned of a lot of these women, and she always, I think they always made a spot for her because she was a great talent, and I think underrated in a way.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they always made a spot for her because she was a great worker, but with WWE and WCW, she was really the only person to hold it down, but she also had a pretty large voice by telling like, these people like, hey, let's bring in Bull, let's bring in Aja, let's bring in Akira Hokuto, like I think in a way, and like even advocating for Luna Vachon, like I think in a way she was like, the belt looks good on me, but you guys got to give me something to work with, and it was really cool to see her come out at Evolution for that battle royal.
Oh, that's
and,
what
like,
it was.
She had,
yeah,
and she had the OG gear too.
Yes. Oh my, I was so into it. I prefer calling her Medusa, but I love the gear, and I was like, all right, fine, she could be a Alundra Blaze today. Medusa is just a much cooler name.
Yeah, she was great, man. She was really great. I think yeah, she like I love Medusa, Alundra Blaze, because again, like she advocated for a lot of the other women, and especially at a very difficult time for women to just speak up for themselves in general. She deserves massive credit for that, and it was very cool to see her talk about that during Luna Vachon's Dark Side of the Ring. Yeah,
and also I think she had the respect of the men as well. Like they wouldn't talk shit to her, they wouldn't get away with that. Like, she'd beat them up or whatever.
Yeah.
Another woman we mentioned that was I was a huge fan of, and was Lita. And I feel like when Lita came around, I was, I don't know, 16, whatever. And, obviously had a huge crush on her. But like, also I felt like, wow, this is like the first wrestler from like my generation, representing me, her. And then she teamed up with the Hardys in WWE. But I mean, I was into her even in ECW as Miss Congeniality. I was like, this girl is cool. When she came in WWE with S.A. Rios, and then both of them were doing moonsaults, and I'm like, whoa, she does high spots? This was like the first woman I saw to do high spots, and I was just like, she's such a cool like I just want to hang out with her. I want to listen to like new metal with her or whatever. and I feel like she was like the first kind of diva or women's wrestler or whatever, where it was like she wasn't necessarily initially portrayed as like a pinup. She was more like the girl next door. And I think that was like a huge part of the appeal of Team Extreme.
Yeah. And even to see her take the table bumps.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It was like, whoa, you know, like, again, going back to Luna and Chyna, like, we saw them get, you know, like power bombed and everything. But then to see Lita do these moonsaults, do these Hurricane Ranas, and again, like taking table bumps was wild to me growing up. And I wanted to be her so bad. I remember like getting the WWE magazine or WWF magazines at the time, and like just getting the full like center folds of Lita and hanging it up in my room, because like her fashion, like whenever she wore the fishnets and like the cargo pants with the thongs hanging out, like I did the exact same thing. I was dressed in the exact same way. I was like in middle school, but still dressed the same way. And yeah, the thing with Lita is that I feel like people say that she was like the anti-diva at the time, and I think they were right, but she was a perfect element for someone who was the face of the division, and that was Trish Stratus.
Yes.
They were like total polar opposites,
Great
especially
point.
in terms of like character, and then the arsenal of like skills that they have in the ring. Like they're completely different, but yet they both started out the same way, right? They both started out as valets, as managers, and then eventually blossomed on their own to be, you know, their own wrestlers, to be themselves. And then they main evented Monday Night Raw, and they were the first, you know, women's match to main event it for a championship. And man, that was so cool to see growing up. Like, again, I wanted to be her so bad, and then playing as her in all the WWE video games that came out was so cool. Like, it was so cool to like grow up with that, because in the 90s with Chyna and Luna, and I always go back to them, but like I was purely a kid. Like I was like 6-8 years old. But now with Lita coming through, like I was a preteen. So I was like understanding like the culture a little bit more and appreciating a little bit more of my like femininity.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that. I channeled that through Lita, but also, again, she was very authentic, and she was very, you know, she stayed true to herself. And it definitely helped that she teamed up with the Hardys as well. Like they were the coolest team ever.
Yeah, like of the moment,
cool.
they were the team of, like, I loved Jeff Hardy. Like the three of them, you know, like they were my crew. Like they were the people who I saw as myself in WWE. So I was always like rooting for them to win the title. Like when they had that feud with Steve Austin and Triple H, where Jeff Hardy won the IC title, and then they like all beat up Jeff Hardy. I was like, oh my God, like I was so engaged in it. Like my disbelief was out the window. I was just like, come on, like we need this. And to your point about Trish and Lita, I think that was like the first women's feud that was treated pretty serious. And that was like, this is not about you stole my boyfriend, you know, like it's just, this is athleticism. This is about who wants to be the women's champion. And it was the first time I feel like the women's matches were like good matches. Like it wasn't just punch, kick, punch, roll up or whatever. It was like, this is a great thing. And I feel like she really elevated Trish's work rate as well, because Trish came from the fitness world. She was never really into wrestling. She was just recruited. And I give Trish so much credit because she fell in love with it. She saw what it was and she decided, I'm going to get good at this. And she did. I love Trish. I have nothing but respect for Trish and what she's done. And their feud is absolutely iconic. I agree with you. And I love that they're the first women's main event of Raw. And like when there was all the talk of the women's evolution and all that, I felt at the time, I was like, you know, like you got to give credit to Lita and Trish here, you know, like because they were doing this stuff when no one was paying attention, really, not as much as now. And I'm really glad that they eventually did very much get their flowers, the both of them, to the point that they came back to do full on feuds, each of them with Becky Lynch. Like I thought that was so cool. Like, get those paychecks.
Yeah, get that money.
Yeah, get those new generations of fans to come to your signings. Go for it. Like, do it. And with Lita, like, talk about Matt, like, I love that she had this whole other life outside of wrestling when she decided to leave WWE. She did she was in a band, the Lucha Gores, which was a really fun punk band, and she also did a ton of makeup work. I know that she worked on a Skeleton Witch video with my friends in that band, and so like she's been all over. She travels, like she's been living her life. Like I wish I had half the life that Lita had.
Me too. I wish I had half the fashion as Lita has. Like like even now seeing her rock like the checkerboard slip-on Vans, it's like, man, you're so cool.
And she
like
still looks
things like that.
She looks amazing. I think she's really held up great. Like, I mean, Trish as well. Whoever their plastic surgery people are, they deserve some sort of raises, because I think with Lita specifically, it's very tasteful. Like, you can't say like, like she's all plastic, but she's clearly had some work done. And Trish as well. Like, I feel like Trish's face looks completely different than it looked 5 years ago, and then completely different than that looked like 10 years ago, but still looks amazing. I think she looks better now than 5 years ago. Yeah.
If I had the money, I'd do the same thing.
Yeah.
I think we all would.
No judgment here. I think it's great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think, like, I always think back to Lita, like, man, again, going back to that main event at Monday Night Raw, if she wouldn't have landed so rough on her neck with that one spot from the outside to the outside, I think her career would have lasted so much longer than it did. And it makes me think, like, what if she would have lasted to the era of the Beth Phoenixes or even the Natties, right? Where it's like you have people that matched her in-ring work, or her work rate rather.
Right.
And so how would she go toe to toe with people like that? And even seeing her now and coming back years later for the Royal Rumble and Evolution, and even teaming up with Becky, like, it's like, man, like, what would have happened, if like there was a little bit more care? And not to say that she didn't have any care, but it's, freak accidents happen in wrestling and professional wrestling all the time. But I always think, like, man, that would have been so cool. But it's now even better where, this new generation that is now hook, line, sink into women's wrestling, again, with the help of like the 4 Horsewomen and Asuka even, and Bianca Belair and Rhea Ripley, for them to now experience the level of what, quote unquote, like, guys feel whenever, The Undertaker comes back or Stone Cold Steve Austin comes back and has a main event at WrestleMania against Kevin Owens. Like, when Trish and Lita come back, that's the equivalent to us almost, right? Where it's like, we grew up with that. And again, like, Trish and Lita, I will always put them at that same level of The Rock and Stone Cold. Like, that was the women's division, like their version of that, that version of that feud together. And so, for them to come back and still work with these women, and, Trish, even, I know she may not be on this list, but even Trish having like that steel cage match against Becky Lynch like a couple months ago, like, it's incredible to know that now there's a brand new generation that can go back and watch that Monday Night Raw, or watch, the one, what is it, WrestleMania 18 with Jazz and Victoria and Trish. Like, that's a great match, so it's good that, now these women are coming back, and they're much more badass than ever, too.
Yeah, they're in better shape than I am, so all the credit to them. Let's talk about some modern women. You brought up a few. Asuka, I think, definitely belongs on this list. She is a total metalhead, first of all. She loves Iron Maiden. She's constantly, like, in her Instagram stories, using metal bands like Slayer. And much like Chyna and these women, she's a total badass, I feel. And she's presented as tough as nails. Like, nobody is ready for Asuka.
Yeah.
And I never really watched her stuff in Japan until I learned of her through NXT. And I looked up the match that she had with Minoru Suzuki, or I think it was a tag match with her and Marufuji against Minoru Suzuki. And like how all the stiff shots were like, it was very uncomfortable. Like, I don't think I need to ever rewatch it because it's borderline domestic violence. But like, she took the abuse and she gave it. Like, she is the toughest woman. And what I love is that she really, when she came into NXT, it was still during that like transition of like, okay, we're training the women to be better wrestlers. I feel like everyone she got in the ring with, that opponent had their game upped by just working with her because she had all those years of experience wrestling in Japan. Like the way they train the women in Japan seems totally different, or even the men in Japan seems totally different than here. So it's like they were bringing her in is like a totally different flavor for these women to get used to. And I'm sure a lot of these women in the NXT thing never experience a stiff forearm to the cheek until they saw Asuka. So I love Asuka. I think she is she's kind of like she almost doesn't get the credit that she deserves for like changing the game coming here. Cause also she was the first Japanese wrestler where they didn't give her like some bullshit hokey gimmick of she's just like, the weird foreign girl. They did give her that weird Japanese font in her intro initially, just the generic Japanese font. That's as far as it went. But ultimately she was like Triple H saw who this woman was and how serious of a talent she was and how she could be presented seriously. And what I loved is it worked. Like NXT fans loved her, and then she came to the main roster. They did all that hokey stuff, but then they eventually figured it out with her. And I think she's in a really good place for her character, and they treat her with the respect that she deserves now.
Yeah. Especially when you go back and watch like her Kana stuff from Japan. Man, that stuff was so good when she would paint herself like it was almost like a killer clown and like blood was like dripping out of her mouth. It was intense compared to the presentation that they gave her with NXT. But I agree, like there's a thing with WWE and Vince where if you're not a, born American, then like you're the heel and the audience is definitely going to like, go against you and boo you. And that just wasn't the case when they packaged Asuka at all. And I mean, she's the greatest NXT champion of all time, like regardless of gender. You can't deny that streak. And like you said, I agree. Cause I think when Asuka came to NXT, it was a year after like the 4 horsewomen were really like ruling the black and gold era of NXT. So I think a lot of the other women, I agree, where like they were a little bit more conditioned to, and not just the women, just like the bookers as well, but they were a little bit more conditioned of like, okay, like this is not our old women's division. Like this is a brand new elevated women's division where we need to get them more tougher opponents. And Asuka was the perfect element to bring her in. And I mean, she had classics. That one last woman standing match from NXT against Nikki Cross, that was a great match. Her versus Chyna, and even like Ember Moon Athena was so incredible. And the thing with Asuka is she made it on her own in Japan. Like she appeared in like, so many different smaller promotions, but she created her own with like, Kana Pro, Kana Mania, and then like she never really, I guess conformed to Stardom or TJPW. Like, she had her issues or whatever it was with them, but she made it on her own and she got the recognition from WWE and they brought her in. And now she's like one of the best women's wrestlers on that roster, but she's also the most reliable too when it comes to a business standpoint, because they're always like relying on her to throw the belt on her, which is good because she's a great champion and she's a great worker as well. And now, she moved up to the main roster and everyone says that she should have won, that Mania match at 34 against Charlotte. And I completely agree. And then they put her in that tag and, it was a little bit of a weird spot with Asuka, but eventually they figured it out with her. And even her now, like her face paint now and her misting is on another level.
Yes, the mist. I love that she introduced the mist. I think that's so great. And it adds like it's a different, element to her character that, no other character on the show has. Yeah, she's awesome. And I hope that they do more with her. I feel like she's kind of been phased out a little bit lately just because they have all these other programs. But in a way that's great too, because they have all these talented women now where it's hard to focus on all of them. Like, I don't I don't really watch NXT that much, but Halloween Havoc last week, the first night of Halloween Havoc was like 80% women's matches. That's great. Like that would have never happened even 5 years ago. So I think that's so cool that they're realizing what they have now. Who's another woman you have on your list that we haven't discussed yet?
Oh man, you know what? Another woman that I have on my list is actually Megami Kudo.
Oh, I'm not familiar.
Yeah.
I'm so,
really? She was in the she was a badass wrestler. She's a Japanese wrestler from the 90s, and she started out I'm not sure particularly where she started out, but she was in FCW?
FMW?
FMW. Sorry. Yes, FMW. She had like these intense exploding barbed wire death matches in FMW. And I think that she's like legendary just for that. And something that always sticks out to me with her is during the FMW episode on Dark Side of the Ring, Mick Foley talks about her because Mick Foley spent a lot of time over there. And he talks about her and he says, like, I'll never forget, there was this one woman. He didn't mention her by name, but he was like, I never forget, there's this one woman where she was involved in an exploding barbed wire death match, and her like gear caught on fire and it burned into her skin. And he was like talking about how badass she is, and he was like, I don't know if I could ever do anything like that. So if Mick Foley is saying, like, you know, if Mick Foley's saying he wouldn't do half the things that she's doing, she's pretty badass to me in my eyes.
That's true. I just looked up her wiki, and the match was a no rope barbed wire double landmine glass crush death match. Okay. Yeah. She belongs on the list.
Yeah. I always get FCW, FMW mixed up, but yeah, from that Dark Side of the Ring episode, it was great. And then I went back and I watched some of her matches, and there's some full matches on YouTube as well, but it was like so intense. So freaking intense. Yeah, she's great. She's definitely someone to mention. Even if you're not familiar, like go look her up and watch some of her matches. They're badass. Like most of the matches I've seen with her are like these no rope exploding barbed wire matches. She's had a few match with Mayumi Uzaki in like death, like more so like hardcore matches, and going through like barbed wire tables and like stripping the ring through it, like, you know, until it's bare with the planks. And she's so badass. Definitely go look her up.
I'm definitely gonna watch that barbed wire match after. That sounds incredible. Another one I want to mention, who's in AEW, who I feel like they really need to do more with, is Abadon, the living dead girl.
Oh my God.
They identify as non-binary, but I think for the purpose of our discussion, they fit in here. Abadon is such a cool character, very much in the same vein as like a Luna Vachon, just not going for pretty at all. Like, I love women's wrestlers who don't go for pretty, just for tough, like she, and I love the moniker Living Dead Girl, just the goth new metal thing. Everything about it. Like, I think she should be built up as, you know, kind of like the Gunther of not quite the top woman, but the woman under the top woman who you have to get through to get the women's title shot or something like that. Like, she could have that. They could have that position because it's such a great character, and there's so much to do with it. They could do lore. They could do the, you know, cinematic stuff. I feel it's a totally untapped character that could be huge for AEW.
Yeah. They need to present them much more threatening than they are on the roster. And I know that some fans like compare them to Danhausen. It's like, that's completely two realms when it comes to spooky characters. You know, like you can go back and package Abadon like you did almost with like Mankind, or like even an Undertaker in this women's division, you know, where there's a lot to play up with. And especially, I agree, like cinematically with like these vignettes that you can do at like a graveyard or something, you know, with them would be so dope. Like they do it with Julia Hart, and Julia Hart does a great job with it. But if they took like that, like seasoning that they have with Julia Hart, and they put it into the sauce of Abadon, it would be massive.
I agree. Yeah, that match that she had with Britt Baker like 2 years ago, there was like also a Halloween match. Way better than the Halloween match she had this year. I thought that match was like the template for what they should do with her, of just her no selling and the other competitor just being like, what do I have to do to put like they're a horror movie, like a wrestling horror movie. Danhausen, I think, is more campy. Danhausen is kind of just like a goth Pee-wee almost, whereas Abadon is like Freddy Krueger. I think that's how you could separate the two. All right, so that's what's another one? We could wind this down, but let's do a few more. Did you have any other?
I mean, I would definitely say Su Yung, the Undead Bride, for sure.
Oh yes,
for sure. Yeah, I went to. You're familiar with Melrose Ballroom in Queens?
Yes.
Yeah, I went to an Impact taping there, and Su Yung comes out, and it was I think it was the first time I saw her live. And I was like, I love this. I love everything about this. Like, she is a horror movie for sure. She reminds me of like that 80s Evil Dead horror movie genre. And she comes out to the ring and like she splits. It's dark, like they have like these strobe lights and red lights for her entrance. And she spits blood and she's in front of me, like on the turnbuckle. And the lights come back on in the venue. And I'm like covered in blood. I'm like, I love you. You're great.
It's like, oh, it's a Gwar show all of a sudden.
Yeah. All of a sudden it is. But like, she's another one in the same category as like Luna and Abadon, where she's like respectfully disgusting. And that is a compliment,
yes.
Like to see how gritty she can get in a match, and like her makeup all over the place, like her gear is just like this ripped up, like red dyed lace, kind of leftover wedding dress. Like, she is completely badass. I hope that she does come back, especially at Impact, because even the stuff that she was doing with like Susan and Susie and stuff like that, like her alter egos, and even that, like she's three faces of Su Yung, like three faces of Foley. So that it's really cool. I love the stuff that she does.
Do you watch Impact week to week? Are you an Impact diehard?
Not so much an Impact diehard, but I keep up with it as much as I can. There's so much wrestling.
Yeah, I've been trying to watch it more just because I feel like they're really starting to get a little momentum, and just like you, like I've had to cut down on like I stopped watching Raw and NXT just because I just don't have the time, and so I just follow it the next morning, and if there's like a great match, I'll go back and watch it. But I've been trying to watch more Impact. I check in on their big shows. Like I watched some of Bound for Glory, but like you said, there's too much. And now even all these like newer promotions popping up like that. Tell me about that women's promotion that you went to see last month that just popped up here in New York. How was that?
Yeah, Sankbon. That was incredible. It was so cool because they were presenting it like this brand new Joshi promotion that's going to be heavily based in America. And then they had the endorsement of Bull Nakano, where she's like, yeah, okay, sign me up. But it was more presented as performance art because half of the roster are freelance. Some of them are freelance, but they go under different like alter egos. And
it's almost like Lucha Underground, where it's like known wrestlers, but they have different characters here.
Yeah. It would be cool if they added a little bit. They leaned into the cinematic, theatrical performance of it. We're having like little skits and everything, but it was all they would present it with, like, before each match they had like this little anime short that they would show, and so the characters, they're like heavily charactered. Like, it reminds me of the new era WWE where like everyone had a like hokey character gimmick. It was like that, but it was taken a little more serious. Right. And yeah, man, it was so badass. And all of the entrance songs were like all punk rock songs. They was like the Runaways and gosh, who else? There was so much. The Bangles, I think, as well. Like there were so many cool elements to that show that it felt like a wrestling show. And any diehard wrestling fan, I mean, if Bull Nakano's there, they're gonna go running, right? But it was a cool show where there was a lot of different people in the audience that were not wrestling fans at all.
I love that.
And they got into it. Yeah. And you know, like you're in New York, so you know, like the performance art aspect of New York is so big and heavy, and especially, you know, something to do on a Friday night, and you go and you do something different with a couple of friends. Like that's what it felt like in the audience. Like there was a good chunk of people like that, and then there was a good chunk of just completely, you know, normal wrestling fans. But when you get that excitement all together and everyone starts like chanting, and there's a wrestler called Stray Cat, and she's like climbing over the bleachers of the audience and like is an actual cat. Well, she wasn't an actual cat, but she's acting like it. Like even that, like the whole crowd just chanting meow meow like throughout her whole
I love that.
match was so cool. I hope that they come back to New York. I think they're gonna have another show in Miami in December. So yeah, hopefully they come back.
Yeah, my favorite thing is to bring open-minded non-wrestling fans to a wrestling event and watch them watch it click for them of like, oh, okay, I get it. It's theater, essentially. You know, it's just a live performance and you just kind of go with it. And it's so fun to do that. And that sounds like a great kind of event to bring someone to where they might not be exposed to it. And you see the fun that it is, and it's not like people still think it's like the cringy 90s stuff of like ripping clothes off women or something. It's like, no, it's presented, it's presented well. Okay, so let's wind it down. You've been very gracious with your time. Thanks so much. I just wanted to go through the list of the women I didn't get through, but still belong on the list. I would say Alexa Bliss, she's cheatering. She's more punk rock, but Beth Phoenix, absolutely. She was holding it down in a very weird era for WWE. Mickie James, hardcore country, but I feel like during her Alexis Lurie phase in Ring of Honor, she was very, very metal. Io Sky, much like I feel Asuka, she has that tough vibe of just a woman you don't want to mess with. What comes to mind immediately was like someone heckled her in NXT of like, go back to China, and she just turned around and be like, I'm Japanese, bitch!
But then she says, I'm Japanese, bitch, and then drops into a split and starts stretching for her match. Like, all right, you've got it. You've absolutely got it, dude, for real. And for a while, she was coming out to Poppy, too. And like the visuals also with her entrance, with like the strobe lights, and it's all black. Yeah. Like, oh, man, so badass.
I love her entrance theme. I think it might be my favorite in WWE right now with the... Sounds like a Yakuza theme.
Yeah, it does.
Shayna, the Ace of Spades. I mean, she's referencing Motorhead. I love Shayna Baszler. Again, like she's presented like we're talking about. Like she's not presented as a beauty queen. She's presented as this tough woman that can beat you up, and I love that. Meanwhile, conversely, Liv Morgan, very much presented like a beauty queen, but I love that she's like, I'm goth, I'm dark, I'm in the corner, I'll take it. And Roxy, I love. I'm not as, like I said, I don't really watch that much NXT, but I watched her in Ring of Honor, and I love that she has like the AJ Lee, who also belongs to this list, Lita vibe. Like we need that archetype, that like punk chick. Zelina Vega, I've heard from her husband Malachi Black that she's big into mayhem. So,
oh really? Oh, cool.
Her family loved black metal. He says when he visits them in Queens, they try to take him out to black metal shows, which I'm just like, that is the best anecdote I've ever heard.
I can only imagine like her family, and like I like in St. Vitus, that bar. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
St. Vitus? Yeah. Just like imagining them in that little back room.
That would be great. Shotzi, obviously Shotzi belongs on this list with the green hair and just her whole vibe with the tank. And
yeah, she's ballsy.
Absolutely. And then on the AEW side, I have Emi Sakura for her love of Queen and just being a badass. Jamie Hayter, I believe she had like like a metal song as her entrance on the Indies. I forget what it was. I forgot to look it up, but she counts. She's a tough girl.
Yeah, for sure.
Hikaru Shida, obviously, like total metal person. Julie Hart, we mentioned. Nyla Rose. Penelope Ford. I feel like when I think of Penelope Ford, I just think of like Guns N' Roses.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Ruby Soho, obviously, and Saraya. And then of the old school women's wrestlers, the Walking Riot, Missy Hyatt, especially her ECW run with Sandman. Like, I just love their dynamic and how, like, just both of them look like they needed a shower. Beulah McGillicuddy, total like extreme queen. Her and Francine as well, like two tough girls. And finally, Sherry Martel, because the amount of corpse paint that she wore, especially in her Queen Sherry era, like she is, I think Sherry Martel should get like accolades from like the drag world. Like she was doing drag in the 90s when no one was doing it in WWE. Like she was so great, always great at her role. I feel like she's underrated for how great she was at the time.
Yeah, I agree. I think Sherry should definitely enter more into the conversation of goated managers because she managed a lot of people. Yeah. And I agree. She was doing high-end drag in like the late 80s, early 90s. She was doing it. Like she was really pulling it off. I would also, in like the legendary list, I would also add Fallen Angel. Woman.
Oh my God. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I totally. When I first started this list, she was like one of the first names I thought of. I can't believe I forgot her. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're good. She was like the second name on my list. So we're like right there. We were there. But like, even when you add in like, I feel like sometimes when you talk about metal, you can't ignore like the satanic panic that happened. And like, she was definitely within that era of it. And like I think that she's a perfect time capsule of like the 80s metal hair looks too.
Yeah, she looks those videos are so fun to watch. I like they had one in the Luna one where they cut her hair because she committed herself to Satan. But I can only imagine, especially because this was in Florida and how Florida is like they must have thought Kevin Sullivan was truly the devil. Like I can't imagine him going to the supermarket and then people would be like, oh no, it's the devil, and I feel for Nancy as well. Like it was a bit of a risk to portray that kind of a character for like, because he could defend himself or whatever. But like for her, that could have stained her reputation forever. Like these people who think they're taking it seriously, absolutely. And she's someone who I think it's beyond tragic what happened to her, but also just how her career is overshadowed by, her last few days. Like it's almost like people forget that she was one of the best valets. Like even in her time as Ric Flair's valet, I thought she was so devious and could not like she was a great heel. She knew how to work.
Yeah, and she understood how to work, even though like this wasn't her life, right? Like she wasn't a wrestling fan. She wasn't getting into wrestling just to wrestle. Like she fell into it. And then when she did, like she understood the assignment, right? Like you could not accomplish a character like Fallen Angel with her. And like, again, with the satanic elements that played into it, her coming out with like a python over her shoulders, like nobody would have really done that role as perfect as her. And I do like in the Dark Side of the Ring episode where it was mentioned that she should be highlighted a little bit more beyond the tragedy that did happen. But I like that after that episode, it did open up a conversation with her where it was like, wait, let's go back and let's watch some of her stuff that she did, because she is really good. And I agree, like her stuff with Flair, you go back and you watch her stuff with Flair, she was right there with him when it came to like the delivery, when it came to the on-screen presence. Like you could see that she like flipped the switch whenever the camera was on, just like Flair, just like even when she's doing these promos with Mean Gene, like she understood it and she was in the moment just as much as they were.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the angle that with Sullivan and Benoit where because like I thought she really shined in that. Like all of those, because it's not like Benoit had any charisma, like he's a stiff board. So she was carrying that whole angle, I think, and because of of the culture we lived in, like I'm sure everyone hated, like how could you leave your husband, you Jezebel, whatever. So yeah, all the credit in the world to her. Were there any other women on your list that we hadn't mentioned yet?
Oh man, I mean, like we did mention Rhea Ripley.
Yes,
of course.
Yes.
But yeah, like I said in the beginning, we have most of the same names on our
list. That's great. That's awesome. This has been like such a fun discussion. This is truly one of my favorite episodes we've ever done of Squared Circle Pit, because it's always fun to just kind of take this like step back and like look at all the different cool things. So it's really, really exciting to take a trip down memory lane with you. and if people want more to hang out with you more, Alex, where can they check you out?
Yes, they can check me out on twitch.tv/Queen of the Ring. I'm on very often, especially Thursdays, watching Total Bellas. So if you want to get into that madness world of reality television, you can follow me there. And then Queen of the Ring everywhere on Instagram and Twitter. And yeah, this has been a lot of fun. When you I wrote to me like, hey, I have this concept of an episode. Do you want to do it? I was like, fuck yeah. I don't know if I can curse.
You can curse.
Hell yes. Fuck yeah. I said, fuck yeah, I want to do this. It sounds like such a great idea. And yeah, to highlight more badass metal women.
Yeah. And I love that you're watching Total Bellas. It was such a not guilty. It was a pleasure for me to watch it because it was so staged. Like I loved how like John Cena is like the ultimate heel on that show. Like he's such a bad person for her. Like there was that one episode early in this series where Nikki thinks he's talking to another woman, and then he finally goes, I was talking to another woman. And then it's like commercial break. And then they come back. I was talking to another woman about buying you a house. I was like, yeah, this is the best worst. I have to catch up because I know in the later season, I kind of faded away in the last few seasons, but then there's this stuff with like Brian's concussion and everything. I do want to watch that. I'm curious about it. Picking that.
Oh man, the stuff with Brian's concussion is good. Like that stuff is what wrestling fans would eat up if it was presented in like the WWE network with like the WWE 24s and all that. Like it was so good. Yeah, definitely go back. You got to watch the breakup of Nikki Bella and John Cena now.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that you mentioned another great point. Like there was so much really interesting behind the scenes stuff that you wouldn't see on any other show because this wasn't a WWE production. This was the production team from Real World, Bunna Murray or whatever they're called. So they would show way more. So yeah, you would really get this really cool inside look. Plus, they would always give Natty the worst storyline, the best worst storylines.
Dude, there was a storyline where Natty hired a dominatrix and her mom walks in. And then her mom participates in the dominatrix. Like they're the dominatrix is
Natty's mom is such a treat.
Dude, like a national treasure for Canada, dude.
Yes. I love her so. I love there was that one season with Lana on it, and they were trying to make her and Lana like best friends.
Yeah.
And there was the episode where like Lana was flirting with Jim Neidhart, and he was like, oh, "Okay, sure."
Wait, maybe we need to add Natty to the list of like metal ass women because remember her feud with Summer Rae, and she just like slaps the shit out of her.
Yes. I mean, I give Natty so much credit because they made her eat so much shit. Like the fart storyline, I remember, like, I'll never forget, like, but she would always do it and she would always come through. And I think what's funny is like her taking Total Divas was what made her career because they would give her those shitty storylines in Total Divas. Like she was the butt of the joke always. But that's what made her memorable to all this new generation of fans. And then because of that, she started getting like a real push finally. So there's a lesson there, like sometimes you really do got to turn chicken shit into chicken salad to get something going.
She absolutely did.
Yeah, she absolutely did. Alex, an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for hanging out. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Yes.
And everyone make sure to check out Queen of the Ring on Twitch.